I'm generally leery of intentional manipulation of cognitive systems to achieve a particular endpoint that has a permanence or semi-permanence about it, because I don't think we have sufficient understanding of the second, third, and fourth order effects of doing something like that. So, for example, would wiring our brains in a way to achieve, to feel more pleasure actually alter the way we experience pain? You know, making pain actually more painful. And it's a really basic example, but we don't yet know what happens next when we start doing things like that, which isn't a reason to say never ever do it, but is a reason to be cautious about it. And I'm not a massive fan of the precautionary principle in use in every regard, but this is a case where that actually is a pretty good idea. Being really careful, being really limited, transparent, you make measurements of everything you do, you record everything you do whatever you can to be able to step back from the ledge when possible, and pay attention to the longer term impact. One of the benefits of potentially having a radically extended longevity, which I think is something that may not work for me as I'm going to hit 50 soon, but for you and for people younger than you, probably have much longer lifespans. One of the benefits of that is you have the time to be thoughtful. You have the time to sit back and say, okay, let's see how this plays out over the next decade. Because rather than a decade being 1/7 of your life, it means maybe 1/100th of your life. And think about that for a second. 1/100th of your life today, that's less than a year for most people today. And a lot of people can say, okay, I'll put this off for a year. There's a standard suggestion: if you're going to get a tattoo, draw it on there and wait for a year, and come back and think, do I really want this as a tattoo? Because waiting for a year, that's a decent long time for a lot of people, but it's approachable. So imagine a decade having that same kind of approachability, where I can wait for a decade to see how this plays out. Or we can wait for 25 years, for a generation, to see how this technology plays out, what the long-term effects are of this particular new biotechnology, what the unexpected consequences are of this kind of rewiring of brains. And I think that is, for me, one of the more hopeful aspects of what the future could hold. Because if we have more ability to think about the consequences of our actions, if we have a greater ability to see, not just see the future, but see ourselves in that future, and to understand that what I do today won't just affect some unnamed next generation, won't just affect my kids if I have kids. It will affect me. And that's awfully selfish, but at the same time, that's how we evolved. We evolved to worry about ourselves and to worry about our immediate relations. And I believe that one of the unanticipated benefits of radical life extension will be the radical expansion of our sense of time, our sense of our presence in time. Yes, which is one of the things that people sometimes forget about. When you talk about a world where maybe there's a basic income guarantee, or people have the ability to live a decent life but aren't necessarily tied to a particular daily job, it's a world that has an opportunity for much more fun. One of the models I have in mind when I think about what could this kind of future look like? If things work right, what could this future look like? Actually, Burning Man is what comes to mind. A society that isn't around, it's a temporary society, but it's one that's not based around trade. It's based around artistic interaction, taking drugs and having sex. Which, if you think about it, that's pretty much the kind of ideal for what you want to do on a vacation. And if the vacation is what is the rest of your life, you spend your time making art and having fun, this is not a bad future. It's not, you have the naked hippies running around, but at least with the Burning Man, and I suspect with the ones you're talking about as well. You say what is called the seed? Burning Seed.
Burning Seed and Confest.
Confess?
Confest.
Oh, Confest.
Yeah.
I suspect with these, there's also a very strong presence of artistic creation. people making enormous art cars or giant automations, automata, and dressing in weird costumes, and that's because it's an opportunity to express themselves in a way that they wouldn't get to in the normal day-to-day workplace, even if they do maker type stuff professionally. And that's the kind of thing that I think can be really validating for people, really enjoyable for people, and would make for a decent future. Yes, there'll be people who want to be entrepreneurs, people who want to go explore the world, explore the galaxy, and a lot of people who want to sit around and play video games. And that's fine, but I suspect what we'll see, especially after the first generation, as the second and third generations start to emerge, of people who grew up in this kind of world, they spend a lot of time making art. One of the more interesting possibilities that emerges with longevity, especially if you're talking longevity as an extension of youth. Essentially, you hit 25, your brain is mostly formed, your body is pretty much at its peak, and that persists. Is the likelihood that you end up with the possibility of emotional and physical relations between people who are vastly different at vastly different ages? I'm 180, and I've been in a relationship with someone who is now 400 years old, but that 23-year-old looks pretty hot and visually indistinguishable. The three of us are indistinguishable in terms of how old do you look. And that's going to be really weird. I really love thinking about the emotional consequences of longevity. How long does love last? We know people who have lived, marriages that have lasted 70 years. I'm in a week, I'm going to be celebrating the 29-year anniversary of my first date with my wife. It's a fairly long-lasting relationship, and I can see it lasting another 29 years. But could I see it lasting 400 years? Could a relationship last 400 years? Could it last 100 years? We don't know, and that'll be exciting. There will be mythologies built around that. Already one of my favorite pieces of science fiction is actually about that very issue. In Kim Stanley Robinson's The Martians, which is a collection of short stories set in the same universe as his Mars trilogy, there's a story of a couple that get together, spend decades together, and split up. But because memory doesn't last. People are good about remembering the last 50 years or so, but as they live for several hundred years, they have just the sparest recollection of what happened in their lives a century or three ago. So this couple keep meeting each other, spending decades together, splitting up, going away, then a century later meeting each other as if for the first time. And they're drawn together. They keep meeting and falling in love and splitting up and forgetting each other, then meeting and falling in love. And it just struck me, that's just a beautiful story that has the ache of plausibility. You can feel that feels, to me, it feels like it's something that might happen simply because of the intersection between the limits of biology and potentially unlimited life.